This is Hunter Wade at the Athletes Lounge podcast. I'm here with my guest.
Joe Newcomb, head boys basketball coach at Mount Vernon High School.
So, Coach, we talked a little bit before the recording about how you just now got all your kids back. So, where are you at this point in the preseason in terms of getting your kids ready?
Obviously, we've been doing conditioning and open gyms and the limited contact piece, but so many of our guys play football. So I think it's important with those guys that we count on that play football to give them some time. So last week, they kind of took last week off. We did some conditioning with them this week, have open gym tonight, and more or less just try to get them in the gym here a couple times before we hit the ground for real on Monday. So excited to have all those guys back. I think we're pretty healthy going into practice, but obviously we got to get into game shape, and there's a huge difference between the fall sports and their shape and what we've got to get into basketball wise. But excited for the journey.
You kind of segued into my next question. How do you get people out of football shape into basketball shape? Because they're completely different types of being in shape.
It is. I think the biggest thing is you got to play, and I think you until you get up and down the floor a few times and go through that almost misery, of getting your lungs back. That's really how you do it. I think it's something that when you don't have those guys through the conditioning piece of the fall season, you got to do a good job of making practice as difficult as you can, and making sure that you're getting into shape in those 2 hours that you're on the floor, especially that first week or two as you get going.
How do you, or at this point in the season, how much do you know about your team or what you think you can do with your team?
Well, luckily, we got everything back from last year. We had no seniors on our roster last year. And going into last year, I felt like we had some talent, but knew there was going to be growing pains. When you're playing some freshmen and playing some guys who had played a lot of JV minutes, but not really had proven anything at the varsity level, there's going to be growing pains. And I think we lost 5 or 6 1 or 2 possession ball games to where your record could be flipped if those go the other way. But unfortunately, that's part of the growing process is learning how to win those close ones. So I feel like we have a really good understanding of who we are. I think there's a couple guys that we're going to add to the mix from last year that have taken some big jumps here in the off season that I think can really help us. With a sophomore, Meyer Robb, who I think is a guy who can score in a variety of ways and something that I think will really help us on the offensive end of the floor. And then a senior in Aaron Weiss, who's probably our biggest kid in our program, 6'5", 6'6", who played a lot of JV for us last year, but hadn't ever had an opportunity to get a lot of minutes. I think that was vital for him and his development. And I think adding those two to kind of what we already have, I'm excited about it. And I think we can do some things defensively that maybe we haven't been able to do in the past, as far as pressing and getting into people, maybe a little bit more because we have some depth. So excited about that opportunity and kind of seeing how the pieces fit together and seeing what we can do.
So how you mentioned you got pretty much you got all your pieces back from last year. So what changes, if any, do you think you're gonna have to make this year, or can you pretty much run the same system from last year and carry it into this year?
Well, obviously, you always have to make some changes. Like I said, we got 2 or 3 guys that will add to the mix, that bring some things I think that we were missing last year. If you watched us at all last year, we didn't have much size at all on the floor. So really, we had to do some things to try to take away other opponents' size. Adding Weiss with some size allows us to be more traditional on the defensive end. But I also think we've got depth that we've probably not ever had. I think we have a chance to have 8 to 10 guys who can provide quality minutes for us. And with that, I think that allows us to, like I said, get after it more on the defensive end and push pace and push style that we'd like to be able to do. But unfortunately, our hands have been tied some just with a depth piece. So obviously, I think there'll be some changes as far as what style we look, kind of what we look like, and style that we've had over the past couple of years. But at the end of the day, our whole philosophy is about playing hard and putting it on the line. And that's something that doesn't ever change. In order for us to be successful, we have to do the little things well. And we have to do that on a nightly basis. And if we do that, then I like our chances to have some success throughout the year.
How big of an advantage is it to roll back your rotation from last year into this year?
Well, I'll tell you at the end of the year if it was an advantage or not. I like the idea of having everybody back. I think all of our kids know what I expect. I know what to expect from them, and just the familiarity with one another is huge. I also think it brings expectation. There's been a lot of years here where there has not been a whole lot of expectation from who we are and how what maybe we're going to do. And I think specifically within our locker room, there's a lot of expectation, and I think that's exciting. I think that's a different kind of a change of pace for who we've been, and I think the kids are excited to go out and prove what they're capable of.
Right now, since you got all your pieces back and you're kind of, I guess, building on what you had last year, is there anything going into year that worries you a little bit?
Well, you always have to stay healthy.
Yeah.
I think that's something that basketball, you just never know what's going to happen. So you got to have some luck on your side in regards to injuries and sickness and those types of things. But I think really the biggest thing that we struggled with last year was just consistently sharing the basketball and trusting those around us. I thought we took a huge step in that regard this summer, playing together. Part of that, I think, last year was just not being familiar with one another. Adding new faces to the mix, adding some young guys, and I think that's difficult. But as you play with one another and you build trust, and some of that's happened on the football field this year, as far as having Nico as our quarterback and Hostetter is one of our receivers who's taken the top off some of other defenses. I think there's been a trust built there. And I'm excited to see the growth made with each other as far as just trusting one another and believing that the other guy beside me can get the job done because you can't do it by yourself. I think we're all smart enough to know that if you try to do things on your own, it usually doesn't end well. And we've got to do a good job of making sure that we put people in a position to be successful and then trusting those around us.
What's your philosophy on the offense and defensive end?
I think that changes at the high school level all the time, based on personnel. Last year and really the last few years, we've had somebody that's maybe been a bigger body that can't get out and pressure like maybe we want to. We also haven't had a ton of depth, to where if you get in foul trouble or things happen, now you're really behind the eight ball. So this year, having some depth, I would like to get out and pressure more, force the issue and force the pace, dictate that from us defensively. And then offensively, I've taken some things from where I played for my dad here in Indiana for when I grew up, and then went to Iowa and played college, and then coached at Bettendorf High School, which is a 4A program in Iowa, and taken some things from kind of all of my stops. Uh, I think there's important things that each coach that I've played for and worked with I've taken from. Biggest thing, and I try to teach our kids is how to play when they don't have the basketball in their hands. I think that's something that good teams run good motion, and good programs teach kids what to do when they don't have the basketball. I think you watch high school basketball, there's a lot of kids who are really skilled with the ball in their hands. They struggle at times with what to do when the ball's not in their hands. And I think that's something that we have tried to teach at our younger levels, use common terminology so that kids understand what we're trying to do at the high school level. And now, haven't been here 4 or 5 years, starting to see kids who understand what we're expecting and how we do things, and hopefully that then shows on the floor.
Right now, we talk about your philosophy changes. How do you like to play defensively if you had a choice?
Well, I'd like to get out in the passing lanes and make things difficult for people. When teams are comfortable, they can pick you apart. Pressure on the basketball. We want try to take one pass away out on the perimeter on the wings. And then obviously my whole philosophy is you got to protect the paint. Biggest thing is when the ball gets into the paint, bad things happen for you. And then offensively is the exact same thing. If you can get ball reversals and paint touches, shooting percentages obviously go up. So those are things that we speak on specifically. And I think if you can eliminate paint touches on the defensive end, however you do that, and then find ways to get paint touches on the offensive end, more times than not, you're going to be successful.
So with a little bit of increased size this year, does it allow you to be more flexible on offense
I think
and
it does.
defense?
I think both offensively and defensively. I think there's some things that we can do from a zone standpoint with some size and some length, especially we've always run some 1-3-1 and a 2-2-1 in the half court, which is a little bit different than what some other people maybe run. But I think we've got some increased length that allows us to maybe stretch that out from the full court. And then offensively, our big kid can shoot it. We've got two kids who Nate Howard Jr., who's 6'5", can really shoot it. And then the Weiss kid, he's a really good 15 to 18-foot shooter. So I think we can put them in some pick and roll opportunities and some ball screen things and do different things with them. You know, when you have a traditional back to the basket guy, sometimes you are handcuffed because he's around the rim. And these guys aren't necessarily that, but I think they can be kind of a face up and a back to the basket hybrid type guy. And that allows you to do lots of different things on the offensive end.
Because you played in college and because you coached at a bigger, high school originally, is there any type of uh thing you kind of try to take from those experiences? I'm sure there are, and put to this roster.
I think the biggest thing that I've taken just from playing, having the opportunity to play as much as I have, and then in coaching different places is at the end of the day, we all want to win basketball games, but more importantly, what are we doing using the game of basketball to teach life lessons? And I think the longer I've been around the game, the more I've coached, the more I realize that's really what's important, and um, there's all kinds of philosophical things that you can take from different coaches and your experiences. But more than anything that stands out is just what are you doing to help create young men who are going to go on and be successful, and what are you doing at the high school level to give a positive experience to each of these guys? And I think that's something that I have tried to take a lot of pride in. And I think when you do that, good things happen. I think if you take care of your guys and you're giving them a good experience and remembering what's really important, I think that's what it's all about.
How much film do you guys try to watch throughout the year?
I'm a huge film guy as far as trying to break things down. We as coaches watch hours of each opponent. I think our bare minimum is 3 games per opponent going in once we get going. I think that's something that allows us to try to have a good understanding of what our opponents are trying to do. As a team, we watch breakdown of offensive, defensive, and under OB of every single opponent, and then we share clips with the kids that they're expected to watch then before each opponent. And then obviously you got to watch yourselves too. I think sometimes in the heat of the or heat of the season, sometimes you forget just how important it is to watch yourself, and how important it is to grow from what you've done the night before and what you can learn from. And that's something that we do as well. But really, film is the best teacher, and I think that's something that film doesn't lie and it doesn't hide things. And you got to do a good job of learning from that.
So your opener's, still a whiles away. It's November 21st.
That it is, yes.
And so when will you start preparing for that game? Preparing for Reveille. When will you start preparing for them?
Well, we've got 2 weeks here, then we scrimmage Wood Memorial this year. So we'll probably start Brevet Thursday, Friday before kind of that scrimmage. Our scrimmage is on a Saturday, which is late, but we'll spend 2 or 3 days of true prep for Revet. And then we have also Saturday right after Thanksgiving. We play up at Terre Haute in the Gobbler Shootout, which be a fun experience for the kids. So we'll have just a day prep for that as well. So we'll spend some time really on Revet and North Central, both kind of that week of Thanksgiving leading up.
right now, leading up to the season, you're scrimmaging yourself, I'm sure some. Would you argue or would you say that the Wood Memorial scrimmage is a lot more valuable than the scrimmages with inter squad?
I think there's value in each, but absolutely, I think when you get to the point where I think we know each other pretty well after a week or so, I think getting out and playing someone else is valuable. I think just having the opportunity to run things that your kids don't already know what's coming, and being able to mix and match maybe some lineups that you can't always do in practice just because of a competition standpoint, and seeing how those puzzle pieces fit together against live action obviously is valuable, and then being able to treat it as kind of a game and figuring out how you respond to some adversity, I think is always a valuable lesson.
Well, my point was being there, your guys will eventually know what you're running anyway. So when you call
Sure.
something, they're already in the right place defensively. Is there any skill you put a premium on, be it shooting, ball handling, basketball IQ? Is there any kind of a skill that you, I guess, favor over the others? Obviously, you want everyone to be good at everything, but
Sure. No, like our program principal, like I touched on earlier, is playing hard, and if you're willing to put it all on the line, there's going to be sometimes where kids who maybe are a little less talented find a way on the floor because they're willing to do things that others aren't. And that's something that we've preached here at Mount Vernon is we may not always be the most skilled or most athletic group. We have to be the most hardworking group. And if we have a group of guys that buy into that, sometimes it's not always about how skilled you are. It's about how hard you work and what you're willing to do for the betterment of the team. And I think that's really, if you ask our guys in the locker room, I think they would believe that, and they would say that more than anything is coach plays guys who put it on the line.
How deep do you like to go into your rotation during the course of a season? How many kids do you think on an average night would see the floor?
When you're able, 7 or 8 is what I like to play. I think if you get more than that, sometimes it's hard to get consistent minutes from guys. But also, if you're able to stretch to get to 9 or 10 and give those guys an opportunity to get some time on the floor, I think that helps you in practice. I think sometimes it's difficult, especially when you get into January and February, those guys that maybe don't get very much playing time. It's hard to stay engaged if you don't get some opportunities. So if you can figure out ways to get those guys some time on the floor and a reward for really putting in all the time that they do in practice, I think that's valuable. But consistently, I think if you get 7 or 8, that's kind of what I like to play.
We mentioned that working hard, hustling might be your favorite attribute, but what's the skill that you'd maybe be fine with a kid not being as good at as long as they're hustling and working hard?
I think you can hide like a lack of athleticism at times. I think you can hide maybe a guy who's not a great shooter. Some of those things that you can maybe hide based on what you're doing offensively. But you've got to be able to have an understanding of what you're supposed to do when you're on the floor. And if you don't know what's going on, I think that's something that is really really difficult to hide. But if you have an idea of what's going on, and you know where you're supposed to be and where your teammates are supposed to be on both ends of the floor, a lot of times I feel like you can hide some of the skill deficits that maybe a guy has because they're a step ahead of others around them. I think that's something that a lot of times is overlooked is just your ability to think the game. And if you can think the game, you're already ahead of so many. And I think then some of those skill deficits that you have are able to be hidden because you're ahead of the game.
And well, let me formulate my next question here. Going into this season, is there any expectation you have laid out? Is it a sectional victory? Is it a certain amount of wins? What's your hopeful expectation for this year?
I think it's hard to put a number on things. That's
Yeah.
something that I've never really believed in. I think a lot of times people put you want to be a conference champion, you want to be a sectional champion, I think those are no brainers. I think everybody wants to do those things. More than anything, what are you doing each day to accomplish those? And I think, like I've talked about, if you put everything on the line every night, you can start check boxing things as you go. And more than anything, I want to be competitive every single night. That's something that, as we've tried to build this program from kind of the ground up, when we started 5 years ago, we weren't competitive every night. I think that's something that we as coaches have really talked about of just how are we closing the gap every year, and as you look at scores over the past 5 years, those have changed a lot, and I think last year we were competitive almost every night. This year, we got to be competitive every night. In those games that were those 50-50s last year, you got to find a way to flip. And if you do that, I think you go into the sectional feeling pretty good about who you are and what you've done to that point.
How much new stuff do you implement over the course of a season offensively?
I think that's different for every group. Last year we were unable to implement a lot of new things just because of playing some young ones and some guys that maybe didn't grasp some things as quickly as we wanted as far as understanding what we were doing offensively. I think that's different every year. What I like to do is try to have 2 or 3 different wrinkles basically to what you're doing every couple of games. We have so many good coaches around that do a great job of scouting and understanding what you're trying to do, and they do a great job of taking that away. We try to come up with 2 or 3 wrinkles that may give you 3 or 4 baskets a game that maybe they haven't seen. And just as many close games as that we've been in, if you can find 3 or 4 baskets and then also take away 2 or 3 baskets of your opponent, it gives yourself a chance. That's kind of what we've done and what we believe in. And I feel like if you try to do too much more than that, it overloads the kids, and try not to have them thinking out there on the floor, but try to use what you do and just throw some wrinkles in as you go.
We talked about what you like to do offensively. What's something that you just absolutely like to stay away from offensively?
We have not been able to uh, in transition. Like we're ones that we believe in order to be successful, we cannot just be like an up and down run around team as far as taking quick wide open or quick first available shots. It's something that when we do that, we take when we become a jump shooting team and we become a team that takes first availables, we struggle, and it's something that we want to push pace, but then there's rules within what we're trying to do when we push pace. We've got to be able to get paint touches. We've got to be able to get ball reversals if we don't get paint touches, and do a good job in that regard. But that's just something we've struggled with is we sometimes want to push pace, and then push pace then results in us taking really quick and sometimes poor shots, and that ends up leading to runouts on the other end. So that's something that we've got to do a good job of this year to make sure we eliminate uh, defensive deficits for us the other end, disadvantages on the other end, so that we're not giving up easy ones.
How important is outside shooting to your team?
I think it's huge. I think we have struggled to have more than one guy on the floor a lot that can really stretch the defense. We have some guys that are pretty good at beating people off the bounce, but when you don't have guys that can consistently make shots from the outside, people are able to pack the paint on you. And I think that's something that teams have done a good job on us, especially as you get deeper in the year, is really packing the paint and making some of our drivers passers. And then we've had good shots, but just consistently haven't had high percentage shooters. And I think some of the guys have gotten better in the offseason, and adding a couple guys to the mix, I think will give us an opportunity to kind of change that fortune. But we've got to continue to have those guys that do a good job of beating people off the bounce and getting to the rim. They've got to be those guys for us to force help. And I think we'll get to play inside out basketball and hopefully make shots.
We talked about how you favor grittiness, hustle, stuff like that, but that's kind of you can't really teach that. That's kind of something that's naturally, I guess some people just naturally play hard, some people don't. What's the skill you try to coach up the most to your kids?
You got to be able to handle the basketball. It's something that we talk a lot about, is just being good passers. I think so many times we maybe don't make shots or we lead to turnovers because we don't always take pride in passing. You watch the best play the game. Most of those guys have really good people that take pride in their passing around them. It makes them better shooters. It makes them better basketball players because people hit them when they're open, hit them in shooting pockets, those types of things. That's something we talk about a lot, and it's something that we got to continue to get better at. I think if we do that, that'll allow us to become better shooters and better playmakers around those guys that have the ball in their hands a lot.
Right now, and you talked about that you guys kind of struggle when you have to, kick out, from when they pack the paint on you. What's the counter to that from your perspective?
Well, you got to make some shots first. The other thing is we try to some of our offensive stuff that we do. We try to put people on sides alone. We try to ISO them in certain situations to where we can try to go one on one more, as opposed to having 10 eyeballs on you with the basketball. I think so many guys don't understand when you have the ball in your hand. There's 10 eyes on you. And trying, like we talked about, teaching our guys how to be successful off the basketball, learning how to read coming off different screening actions, and then some of those types of things, so that you're able to play with one guy on you. And if you can do that, sometimes it takes away some of those things, that as far as having 5 guys in the paint when you're driving, and some of those things that you're trying to do.
So, from a coach's standpoint, right now, what's the biggest thing you need to work on?
Well, with so many guys that are just coming out of fall sport, just getting the basketball back in our hands and being comfortable with it. I think that's something that takes a week or so, getting kind of out of your fall sport mode, and that's just part of the process. But as far as us specifically basketball wise, we got to take, excuse me, we've got to make a lot of shots, shoot a lot of shots here in the gym here early, and I think just having guys that can make shots consistently will be something that's a huge key for us.
What is the uh biggest factor right now, or I guess your X factor, what you think can, help your team win?
I think it's our depth. I've talked on it a couple times. We have not had much depth, and then sometimes that forces you to play guys more minutes than what they need to play. Sometimes it forces you to play through foul trouble, and it changes what you're able to do because of that. But I feel like we've got two or three guys that will add to our rotation that um, they add an element that maybe we were missing last year. I think Weiss with his size can really help, and then Meyer Rob with his ability to score really at all three levels. At the rim has a really good pull up and can really shoot it from the outside. I think could really help us on the offensive end. And if we have a couple guys who could take some pressure off of Nico and Jackson as far as the scoring load, I think that only makes the game easier for them. Nico, who's close to 1,000-point scorer, 4-year starter, averaged 19 last year. Everybody knows who he is. He's going to be at the top of the scouting report every night. There's all kinds of attention on him. Jackson averaged 17 last year as a junior. There's going to be all kinds of attention on him. Some of our other role players are going to have a lot of opportunity. And if they can take advantage of those opportunities early, I really think it's going to help the other two because they have to respect those around them. And if we can consistently get 30 points around those guys, I think we can be pretty good on the offensive end.
Kind of winding down here. Is there anyone on your staff you want to shout out or give props to for how they do certain things?
Well, I this is the first year we've had some consistency to our staff. So my JV coach Logan Worthington, who he played at Wrights, then was at Oakland City and Hope at North for a couple years. This is his third year with me. He does a really good job and continues to grow. Last year, I was able to add my brother to the staff, which it's pretty cool dynamic to get to coach with your brother. I'm the oldest, he's the youngest, so we never really got to grow up together. And now going through this experience with one another, having the opportunity to coach, like I said, played for our dad in high school, and now get to kind of do that together. That's pretty cool, and that's something that him and I have really grown together because of, and just the experiences we've had to kind of go through. And I really enjoy that. And then our freshman kind of C team coach and another assistant, Michael Landers, who played at Perry Central, and he was at Seymour for a year or two. That's kind of our staff at the high school level.
So that's really all I have prepared question wise. Is there anything you want to get out there before we wrap it up?
No, just really excited about kind of where our program is. And when we started 5 years ago, we had 80 kids in our K through 5 boys program. This year we're at 170 K through 5 boys. Just the growth of our program. We've got a completely new gym remodel with a brand new gym floor. They've painted everything. When you walk in, it feels like a completely new gym. So there's excitement around it. I think there's excitement around our program here in the community. The kids are excited to get going, and hopefully we can go out and have some success this winter.
Well, I've been Hunter Wade at the Athletes Lounge podcast, and thanks for coming on, Coach.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey guys, this is Hunter Wade at the Athletes Lounge podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe where you can. Thanks.